This day began like any ordinary stroll for Keanu Reeves across a spacious city square, but it ended in a way that made many of those who witnessed what happened look at the world differently. No one could have imagined that, in just a few minutes, this usual meeting place would transform into the site of an unexpected encounter where kindness and compassion would triumph over cruelty. Believe me, this story will not leave you indifferent. And if you already sense that something special lies ahead, please support this channel, give a like, subscribe, and leave your comment. Every bit of your support inspires us to create these stories that warm the heart and remind us how vital kindness is in this world. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a simple black t-shirt, dark jeans, and comfortable casual sneakers, stood amidst people passing by, none of whom suspected they were next to a globally famous actor. The city square was noisy, water sparkled in the central fountain, children chased pigeons, and young people perched on low ledges while tourists snapped photos of the beautiful architecture. Everyone looked relaxed and content, some sipped coffee from paper cups, others chatted with friends, and still others quietly read while leaning against the fountain's rim. Keanu himself behaved as though he were not a world-famous star, standing modestly, watching the bustle, smiling at small everyday joys. He rarely drew attention because he tried to be one of the crowd, without flashy statements, intrusive bodyguards, or any hint of self-importance. But today, he was fated to encounter an injustice so blatant that he simply could not remain a bystander. A little off to the side, near a low flower bed, there sat a small stray kitten, thin, with gray and white fur. One look was enough to see that it was ready to bolt at any moment, yet also desperately in need of a scrap of warmth and sympathy. The animal seemed exhausted and frightened, dodging the rushing passers-by. Sometimes, someone would toss it a crumb or try to pet it, but it would recoil in fear, apparently distrustful of humans. Keanu had been observing the kitten while also taking in the sights of the fountain and the people around him. He noticed a small group of 3 teenagers, about 15 or 16 years old. Something in their demeanor immediately gave him pause. They were heading directly toward the flower bed where the frightened kitten crouched. Their loud voices, laughter, and obvious bravado spelled trouble. Keanu sensed the tension building and decided to keep an eye on the situation. Adults on nearby benches were too caught up in their own conversations to notice. No one paid attention when these teenagers bent over the kitten, whispering to it in mocking tones. At first, they teased and taunted the kitten, scaring it with quick hand movements. But soon the teasing escalated into real cruelty. One of them kicked out with his foot, not quite hitting the kitten but making it jerk away in terror. Another teased it with a piece of bread, yanking it away at the last second to see how the kitten would react. Their faces held that thoughtless thrill, that foolish adolescent cruelty that fails to grasp the seriousness of its actions. Keanu, without making any sudden moves, began walking closer. Thanks to his unremarkable clothes, the teenagers hardly noticed him. He heard one of them say, "Who needs this scrawny thing? Look how skinny it is." Another snickered, "Ha, ha, maybe we can sell it to some zoo for a few bucks. Or leave it down a well." The third just cackled cruelly, goading the others on. Keanu couldn't believe that on a crowded square full of people, no one was stepping in. His heart ached for that helpless animal. He had witnessed many such situations. Our world has enough injustices where the strong overpower the weak. But now it was plain, if those teenagers weren't stopped, this little creature might meet a tragic end. He moved in swiftly, before this rough game could get any worse. He crouched beside the flower bed and said softly, "Hello, guys. What are you doing?" The teenagers exchanged glances. One of them, the tallest, apparently the leader, looked at Keanu with annoyance and snarled, "And what's it to you? Why do you care about this stinking cat?" Keanu remained calm and friendly, replying quietly, "You know, that kitten isn't guilty of anything. It hasn't done you any harm." They didn't recognize him. To them, he was just some random passerby who thought he could tell them what to do. The leader sneered, "Get lost, man. Or maybe you want to get hurt, too." Keanu took a deep breath, careful not to show anger. His years of personal losses and difficulties had taught him a valuable lesson: responding to cruelty with cruelty only multiplies the evil. "Maybe you're right that the world can be harsh," he said gently, "but if we stop paying attention to what's going on around us, one day that cruelty might come knocking on our own door." "Why are you being such a philosopher?" the third teenager growled. "And besides, leave us alone. We don't need your speech." Keanu looked the leader straight in the eye, still shielding the kitten from the potential kick. "Guys, I get that you're bored. Maybe you're looking for excitement. But picking on those weaker than you isn't how you earn respect. Stop lecturing us," the leader shot back. "You think we're scared of you? Even if you're some big dude, there are 3 of us, and we can take you, got it?" Their words were getting more aggressive, but Keanu stood firm. He noticed that some bystanders were starting to glance over. The raised voices and sharp gestures had drawn attention. Yet no one fully grasped the situation and, seeing a group of teenagers arguing with a quiet-looking man, simply kept walking. Nobody dared get involved. Keanu knew a serious altercation could be avoided with tact, but he also realized these kids were at the age when any moralizing would only stoke their pride. The more effective blow would be the moment they realized they weren't just harassing some random old guy, but a world-famous actor known for his gentleness and generosity. The key was to time it right. As their talk grew more heated, the kitten in Keanu's hands let out a faint, pitiful mew, like a plea for someone to save it from these tormentors. In a few more seconds, things might get physical, something Keanu very much wanted to avoid. Inwardly, he recalled a moment from his past, an incident when he had witnessed bullying of a defenseless creature but couldn't intervene in time. That memory had haunted him for a long while, and maybe life was now giving him a second chance to do what he couldn't before. Just then, as tension peaked, the leader stepped forward like he might shove Keanu to the ground or at least push him aside. But at that moment, a middle-aged woman approached them. She had sensed something was off from the teens' hostile tones. She had no idea they were squaring off against Keanu Reeves, but she knew whatever was happening wasn't right. "Hey, what's going on here? Kids, why are you picking on this man?" she asked. All 3 teenagers turned to her with equal disdain, making it clear they couldn't care less about some random onlooker's questions. However, her presence alone, the fact that someone else was now asking questions, unsettled them. They had assumed they could get away with tormenting the kitten unnoticed, but a second adult was now getting involved. "Hey, lady, beat it," one hissed. "We'll take care of this ourselves." Seeing their aggression, the woman stepped back, presumably thinking of calling security or the police. Meanwhile, the teens refused to back down. "Listen here, old man," the leader snarled at Keanu, "since you're so sweet on that cat, maybe you'll buy us ice cream or something, huh? Entertaining yourself here?" Keanu calmly locked eyes with him, making sure not to show any anger. "I think you're just trying to look tough," he said, "but real toughness is about protecting, not attacking. You think we're scared of you? Who do you even think you are?" the leader shouted. "You look like some broke loser with no money, so you're not buying us anything." At that point, Keanu knew it was time to lift the veil. He carefully handed the trembling kitten to the still stunned woman, who hadn't yet walked away. "Hold him gently, please," Keanu asked, then turned back to the teenagers. "You're calling me just some broke guy? Do you even know whom you're talking to?" The boys scoffed, expecting Keanu to brag that he was some big businessman or important official. Instead, Keanu pulled out his phone and casually removed the cap that had partly hidden his face, something he sometimes wore to avoid recognition. The tall one squinted at Keanu's now visible face with a hint of recognition. He'd watched some of his movies before. But it was too surreal. "Guys," he muttered, stepping back, "did you realize this is that actor?" "What actor?" the leader snapped, turning sharply to him. "Are you?" But then he, too, recognized the face. It was none other than Keanu Reeves, whose films everyone had seen at least once. The actor whose humility and kindness were legendary. The leader froze, looking as though he'd been stripped bare in front of everyone. "Why you're," he stammered, words failing him. A flush of embarrassment crept over his cheeks. The other two boys stood there, transfixed by Keanu, realizing they'd just insulted a man who far surpassed them in moral character and celebrity status. A moment stretched into eternity. "So, are you finally ready to listen?" Keanu said softly. "You see, it's not about my fame. It's about the fact that you just tormented a defenseless kitten and were ready to prove your strength on anyone." The gathering crowd noticed the teen's shock. People were taking out their phones to film. The leader suddenly felt all that attention turned against him. The very audience he might have craved was now condemning him. "We didn't know," the leader mumbled, taking a half step back. "Hey, man, sorry. We were just messing around. We didn't mean anything, messing around." Keanu looked at the kitten in the woman's arms. "What a shame that your joke could have been the end of its life." By now, the onlookers had formed a ring, and the teens felt truly ashamed. If they had expected sympathy or laughter, it was now gone. Everyone stared at them disapprovingly. "Seriously," the leader tried one last time, "we didn't want to hurt it. We just didn't think." "That's the worst part," Keanu replied gravely. "When people don't think, a little prank can become someone else's disaster." One of the quieter boys stepped forward, remorse etched on his face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean," but the leader, trying to save face, snorted, "Come on, man, it's just a cat. It's not like it matters," he trailed off, seeing that neither Keanu nor the crowd approved. They all realized how despicable his words were. More importantly, the teens understood that their coolness had vanished into thin air. Of all the people, they had picked Keanu Reeves, and by exposing their cruelty, they now stood shamed. The scene that could have gone unnoticed on a busy square had turned into a public unmasking of cruelty. The woman still held the kitten, cradling it and periodically glancing at Keanu in disbelief that he was indeed the famous star. The teenagers felt ever-growing shame as their facade of bravado crumbled under the weight of a moral reckoning. In the end, the only thing left for them to do was apologize and leave. The leader lowered his gaze. "All right, we get it," he motioned for the others to go, and they hurried off. People parted to let them pass, some filming as they walked away. Keanu watched them go, hoping that this would serve as a lifelong lesson. The woman turned to him, smiling faintly and carefully handing the kitten back. "It looks like you really care about him," she said gratefully. Keanu gently took the gray and white kitten, who was still trembling but not as desperately as before. "Thank you for stepping in," he replied, pressing the kitten to his chest. "Without you, those kids might have done something worse." She shook her head. "I just walked up. You did the important part. Though I didn't realize who you were at first." She gave him a warm smile, and Keanu shrugged shyly. "It's fine. I'm used to not flaunting who I am. That's not the point. The important thing is this little guy is safe." Some people from the crowd asked for selfies, and he politely obliged. But first, he wanted to get the kitten to a safer place. The crowd eventually dispersed, returning to their own lives, though many posted videos online. The story quickly gained momentum on social media, without Keanu even knowing. When the square returned to its usual rhythm, Keanu realized he couldn't just abandon the kitten. The poor thing looked so helpless, clearly starving and traumatized from too many nights spent outside. He gently stroked the little creature, which responded with a faint purr, as if discovering kindness for the first time. Not long after, he headed to a nearby veterinary clinic people had mentioned was only a few blocks away. First, he tried to hail a taxi. He wanted to get the kitten checked out as soon as possible. Deep down, he already knew, to leave this creature behind would be a betrayal of the trust it had placed in him. As he passed the edge of the square, he spotted two of the teens, minus their leader, walking by. They looked upset and embarrassed when they saw him. Maybe the gravity of their actions had finally sunk in. He nodded to them, "I hope you'll really rethink this. Try helping out at an animal shelter instead, it's more worthwhile than hurting something defenseless." They lowered their heads and hurried away. Keanu sighed, reflecting on how easily people can be cruel and how quickly that cruelty can be exposed when confronted by a real example of compassion. He felt an emotional bond forming with the kitten, perhaps recalling times in his own life when he had needed support. Or maybe he just couldn't bear to see injustice dealt to the helpless. Whatever it was, his decision stood: he wouldn't leave this tiny creature on the street. Walking along a busy sidewalk, he thought about all the times he'd witnessed or heard of similar animal abuse. Yet behind every story of cruelty, there were countless stories of those who refused to look away, who stepped in to help. Today's experience, despite the initial indifference of many around, had shown that a small number of people were willing to take action. He paused at a corner, feeling the kitten's racing heartbeat. Gently stroking its ears, he whispered, "It'll be okay, buddy. I promise." He found the veterinary clinic in a modest building with a small sign. Stepping inside, he tried not to draw attention to himself. But the receptionist, seeing his face, widened her eyes in recognition. Still, she seemed to respect his wish to avoid a scene. "Good afternoon," Keanu said. "Could we please check this kitten quickly? He seems very malnourished and terrified." "Of course, come right in," she replied, still looking a bit starstruck. Inside, a young vet examined the kitten carefully. Although it was underweight, dehydrated, and covered in scratches, its vital signs were stable. He gave the needed vaccinations and suggested special food for recovery. Keanu thanked him and paid the bill, even though the clinic staff offered to waive it once they realized who he was. He insisted, "No, please. I appreciate your help, but let's do this properly. You do important work." Leaving the clinic, Keanu felt the kitten clinging to him more trustingly. Maybe it was finally experiencing the warmth of a human who genuinely cared. Pedestrians stared now and then, likely thinking, "Is that Keanu Reeves with a kitten?" Catching a taxi, he headed home. The question of whether he could handle the responsibility never truly arose. He knew if fate had thrown them together, so be it. His house was modest by superstar standards, and Keanu felt both excitement and relief. The kitten would finally have a safe place to rest and heal. At home, the kitten initially explored with caution, sniffing the furniture and listening for unfamiliar noises. Keanu spread out a soft blanket on the couch, setting out a bowl of water and the special vet-recommended food. Hesitantly, the kitten crept up and began to eat. "Wow, you've got an appetite," Keanu joked. "You must have been starving." At one point, the kitten glanced up at its rescuer with wide eyes, as if to confirm it was truly safe. Feeling the calm in the room, it went back to devouring its meal. Keanu felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing he'd saved the kitten from a cruel fate. A memory flashed in his mind of a time he'd encountered a stray dog but couldn't rescue it. This dog had run off before Keanu managed to secure help, and the regret stayed with him. Now, life had given him another chance. He seized it. He settled into a nearby chair, watching the kitten adjust to its new environment. In that quiet space, the day's events whirled in his mind: the teen's cruelty, the sudden intervention, their shame. He thought about the moment the leader recognized him, how his arrogance shattered instantly. But the important part wasn't that he recognized a celebrity. It was that the kids realized they were acting horribly. The kitten soon finished eating, and Keanu approached, stroking its back. It flinched but didn't run. Its tail twitched slightly, a sign of curiosity and the first buds of trust. "Don't worry," Keanu murmured. "We'll get through this." Nightfall came, and the city lit up its street lamps. Keanu, drained from the emotional day, checked social media with a vague idea of posting about the importance of defending the defenseless. He discovered that multiple videos of him confronting the teens had already gone viral on dozens of platforms. People posted enthusiastic comments, praising his compassion. Some even mentioned they'd help local animal shelters. But all the attention meant little to Keanu in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was that he did what he felt was right. Fame was never the motive, kindness should be given freely. Nevertheless, he was pleased to see that his simple act had encouraged others to do the same. That night passed peacefully. The kitten hopped onto Keanu's bed, softly purring, a pleasant surprise, as Keanu expected it would take time to build trust. By morning, he decided to buy everything the kitten might need: litter box, toys, a scratching post, committing himself to properly caring for his new companion. Stepping outside, he no longer bothered with a cap. People recognized him anyway, some approaching him to ask about the kitten, others simply thanking him for setting an example. A few brought cat food, offered donations to shelters. Keanu gently repeated, "All help is welcome, as long as it's from the heart." Later that day, the leader of the teenage group suddenly showed up. He'd found Keanu's social media account and realized the story had been recorded from many angles. Maybe he feared backlash, or maybe he truly felt remorse. In any case, he decided to meet Keanu to apologize in person and see if there was any way to make amends. When Keanu heard about this, he paused. Was the boy just trying to salvage his reputation? Or did he sincerely regret what he'd done? But Keanu believed in the value of helping someone who genuinely wanted to learn. So he agreed. They met back at the city square, this time without a crowd. The teenager stood there, shifting nervously, studying the pavement. Keanu approached and said hello. "I'm glad you found the courage to come," he began. The teenager lowered his gaze. I thought I'd be the biggest jerk ever on that video. But then I felt guilty. So I wanted to see if I could help." "You always can," Keanu sighed. "For starters, never repeat that kind of cruelty. Also, I heard about an animal shelter in our neighborhood. They could use help with supplies, volunteering." The boy nodded. Although he didn't speak, Keanu sensed that something in him had changed, that a seed of empathy had been planted. Just then, an elderly couple walked by with their dog. Spotting Keanu, they waved excitedly, thanking him for his kindness. The teen looked away, embarrassed, realizing that genuine respect comes from acts of humanity, not from the false coolness he had shown the day before. "You know," Keanu said to the boy, "sometimes one act can change the course of your life. Better if it's a good act." The teen managed a small smile. "Thanks. I'll try." They went their separate ways, Keanu feeling hopeful that this young person had learned at least a fraction of the lesson about compassion. Returning home, Keanu was greeted by his little ball of fur, who seemed more and more comfortable in this new sanctuary. It played with a foil ball, prowled around the apartment, hopped up on the couch. It was time to give the kitten a name. He thought of something that embodied both resilience and vulnerability. He mulled over various ideas until he recalled an ancient term meaning, ray of light, open to interpretation. Upon hearing it, the kitten sneezed lightly, as though in approval. Keanu took it as a sign and named him Ray. Days turned into weeks. Ray regained his strength and trusted Keanu more each day. Despite his busy schedule, Keanu always found time to monitor the cat's health and give him plenty of love. In the evenings, Ray would nestle beside him on the couch, as if to say, "Thank you for not passing me by." Meanwhile, the footage taken on the square continued to spread on social media. Hundreds of thousands of people left comments. Some thanked Keanu for his example, others said they'd never seen such a sincere display of empathy from a celebrity. Many began sharing photos of how they'd rescued animals from the streets or donated to shelters. That domino effect even surprised Keanu. he never imagined one simple act could spark so many more acts of kindness. Late one evening, exhausted after a busy day, Keanu lay on his couch. Ray climbed into his lap, purring softly. In that moment, Keanu realized that this small measure of happiness was life's true essence. One saved life, its gratitude wordlessly shown by gentle nuzzles, was worth more than any public accolades. He thought again of those teens, especially their leader. Perhaps one day they would remember this as a turning point. Maybe they would rescue another stray animal or stand up for someone being bullied. So often, one good deed sets off a chain of even greater acts. Indeed, that's the power of kindness. It can transform people, expand their hearts, and reshape how they see the world. When we choose not to turn away from another's suffering, we see indifference melt away in others' souls. Around dawn, Keanu considered posting about shelters and rescue efforts, using his fame not for self-promotion but to shine a light on real problems. And that's exactly what he started doing, little by little. To conclude, keeping with his humble nature, he never centered attention on his star persona. What mattered was that people realized. If someone needs help, don't look for excuses to walk on by. A small gesture can save a life. That's what happened with Ray. One small intervention gave this kitten a second chance and revealed the cruelty of those who think hurting a helpless creature is fun. Meanwhile, Keanu gained a loyal friend who greeted him every day with a contented purr, as if saying, "Thanks for not giving up when everything around was chaos." And so we share this story as a reminder of just how precious small acts of kindness can be. Here are the final words for everyone watching. Friends, remember, our world needs goodness. Sometimes a single, timely act can change not only someone else's life but your own. Protect those weaker than you. Don't walk away when someone is in pain or afraid. Let this story remind you that each of us is capable of creating a little miracle. And the more of these miracles we have, the brighter our shared home becomes. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. May it inspire you to do good deeds.